Welcome to the library. It's nice to see many familiar faces and some new faces as well. I am Janet Parr, the programming librarian here at Rapid City Public Libraries. This year we wanted to acknowledge April being National Poetry Month, but the question was, in what way? So every year the Academy of American Poets has a gala celebration at the Lincoln Center in New York. They invite musicians, celebrities, other public figures, musicians, all on one stage one evening to share their favorite poems. I love these type of events, and so I thought it would be fun and interesting if we gathered together members of our community and have a local version of this event. So, having said that, welcome to Rapid City Public Library's first ever community poetry read. Now, I have to admit, before these past few weeks, I am not a regular reader of poetry. But after reading through the poems that our readers sent me in advance, I was sitting in my office one day, and the first poem I read made me laugh. The second poem I read made me cry. And then I kept reading. I experienced wonder, sorrow, joy, more laughter, possibly a few more tears. And then I suddenly found myself remembering why it is we read poetry. Most of us lead busy lives, right? We're constantly running from one place to another. We never really take time to slow down. But poetry does that. It requires us to slow down, to take time to pause. And when we pause, our deepest emotions come to the surface. And so I remembered in my office that day that poetry will open our eyes, opens doors, and welcomes us into a bigger world, one that becomes ripe with possibility. There is an artist and writer cemetery called Green River Cemetery. It is in New York. The artist Jackson Pollock is buried there, as well as other artists, poets, authors. Among the headstone there lies an inscription that reads, "Artists and poets are the raw nerve ends of humanity. By themselves, they can do little to save humanity. Without them, there would be little worth saving." Please join me this evening in a celebration of April being National Poetry Month, the importance of poetry in our culture, and the true impact a poem can have on the life of its reader. And I also want to thank our readers this evening. I was so happy when you walked in the door. You never really know when you're planning an event, so yay for everyone arriving. Our first reader tonight is Mayor Sam Quaker, who will be reading The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Please welcome Mayor Quaker.
Well, good evening. I love poetry. I was swimming the other day at Roosevelt swimming pool, and this guy came along, and I was minding my own business, and he came along and he put his foot on my head and he said, "Peace porridge, hot peace porridge, cold peace porridge in the pot, 5 days old." And I came up sputtering and said, "What on earth was that? You almost drowned me." He said, "It's called poetry." I said, "Okay." I put my foot on his head and I said, "The Odyssey" by Homer. I don't have the Odyssey memorized, so I didn't bring it with me tonight, but I'm going to read The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Thank you, Mayor. Next up is Dr. Nancy Babbitt. Dr. Babbitt has been practicing medicine for 19 years. One evening out of those 19 years, she was the doctor present during the birth of my son. 10 years after that, my son saw Dr. Babbitt at an event. He's a bold kind of child, so he walked up to Dr. Babbitt, introduced himself, and informed her that she had been there the evening he was born. And her response was, "That means I was the first person who saw you naked." And I have to say that was the first time I have ever heard my son be speechless. That mortified me. Dr. Babbitt will be reading Like Lily, Like Wilson by Taylor Molly. Please welcome Dr. Nancy Babbitt.
I'm going to speak really loudly because I can't, I'll run into knock something over if I'm there. So Like Lily, Like Wilson is by Taylor Molly, and he is a middle school teacher. It's very specific to teachers, but now mostly travels around performing his poetry. I'm writing the poem that will change the world, and it's Lily Wilson at my office door. Lily Wilson, the recovering like addict, the worst I've ever seen. So like bad, the whole 8th grade started calling her Like Lily, Like Wilson, like. Until I declared my classroom a like-free zone. And she could not speak for days. But when she finally did, it was to say, "Mr. Molly, this is so hard. Now I have to think before I say anything." Imagine that, Lily. It's for your own good, even if you don't like it. I'm writing the poem that will change the world, and it's Lily Wilson at my office door. Lily is writing a research paper for me, and it's about how homosexuals should not be allowed to adopt children. I'm writing the poem that will change the world, and it's Like Lily, Like Wilson at my office door. She's having trouble finding sources, which is to say ones that back her up. They all argue in favor of what I thought I was against. And it took 4 years of college, 3 years of graduate school, and every incidental teaching experience I have ever had to let out only, "Well, that's an interesting problem, Lily, but what do you propose to do about it?" That's what I want to know. The 8th grade mind is a beautiful thing. Like a newborn baby's face, you can often see it change before your very eyes. I can't believe I'm saying this, Mr. Molly, but I think I'd like to switch sides. And I want to tell her to do more than just believe it, but to enjoy it. That changing your mind is the best way of discovering that you still have one. Or even that minds are like parachutes. That it doesn't matter so much what you pack them with, as long as they open up at the right time. Oh God, Lily, I want to say, you make me feel like a teacher. And who could ask to feel more than that? I want to say all this, but manage only, Lily, I am like so impressed with you. So I finally taught somebody something, namely how to change their mind. And I learned in the process that if I ever want to change the world, it's going to be one 8th grader at a time.
Thank you, Dr. Benedict. When I first emailed Senator Adelstein, we had the usual exchange when I asked him if he'd participate in this event. It was, yes, thank you very much, what time, that sort of thing. Then it quickly emailed into an exchange of rhyme. And now we've become sort of rhyming pen pals, I would say. One of my rhyming responses went like this. Now we've already established I'm not a poet, so don't judge. Emails go out quickly, so. I should try to respond in kind, though as the days wind down, I have no mind. No one else has chosen Ogden Nash. To make a quick decision would be rash. We can wait a few more days, Wednesday morning. Oh, we can wait a few days still. Wednesday morning would fit the bill. Hope to hear from you then. Now with my mouse, I shall click send. And it's just gone on and on like that. It's been a challenge for me, but very fun. I am so pleased that you are here this evening. Please welcome Senator Stan Adelstein.
Can you hear me clearly without a mic? You can't, good, because I don't know how to talk into it. You know, I wasn't elected to public office till I was 70, but I learned some things. No, that isn't the issue. I very much enjoyed the communication that she and I had. We were rhyming back and forth. And the other night yesterday actually, I was thinking of how I could improve it. So I said to Linda, you know, I think that if I worked at it, that I could be quite successful in a life of rhyme. And me, in absolute horror, what did you mean by that? What do you think I meant? It was pretty frightening. Didn't you just say that you're thinking seriously about a life of crime? Anyway, that was what happened. I have some things to share. She said, why do you have so many? I think it's because they're short and kind of funny. They're from Ogden Nash, my favorite American poet, because he talks about real life. People live forever in Jacksonville and St. Petersburg and Tampa. But you don't have to live forever to be a grandpa. The entrance requirements of grandpahood are comparatively mild. You only have to live until your child has a child. From that point on, you start looking both ways over your shoulder, because sometimes you feel 30 years younger and sometimes 30 years older. Now you begin to realize who it was that reached the height of imbecility. It was whoever said that grandparents have all the fun and none of the responsibility. This is the most enticing spider web of taradiddle ever spun, because everyone would love to have a baby around who has no responsibility, but lots of fun. But I can think of no one but a mooncalf or a gaby who would trust their own child to raise a babby. So you have to personally superintend your grandchild from diapers to pants, from bottle to spoon, because you know that your own child hasn't enough sense to come in out of a typhoon. You don't have to live forever to become a grandpa, but if you do want to live forever, don't try to be clever. If you wish to reach the end of the trail with an uncut throat, don't go around saying, quote, I don't mind being a grandpa, but I hate being married to a grandma, unquote. One trouble with a cough is it never quite comes off. Just when you think you're done coughing, there's another cough in the offing. When you think you are through with the spasm, you plunge into sleep like a chasm. All of a sudden, your throat gets tickly. What is this thing called a cough that never comes quite off? Well, the dictionary says it's an expulsion of air from the lungs with violent effort and noise produced by the abrupt opening of the glottis. To which I can only reply, glottis schmottis. Not that I reject the glottis theory. In truth, I really admire my own artistry of glottery. But there's a simpler definition which I can freely present to you. A cough is something that you yourself can't help, but everybody else does just to torment you. Man's earliest pastime, I suppose, was to play with his fingers and his toes. Then later, wearying himself of himself, he devised the monster and the elf, enlivening his existence with blunderbore and puck and mat. A modern man in modern Maryland, I boast my private gate to Faraday. My kaleidoscope, my cornucopia, my own philosopher's stone myopia, except when rationalized by lenses, my world is not what other men's is. Unless I have my glasses on, the postman is a leprechaun. I can wish on either of two new moons. Billboards are riven with mystic runes. Shirts hung out to dry are ragtag gypsies. Mud puddles loom on like Mississippi. And billiard balls resemble plums, and street lamps are like Christ Christopher plums. If my vision were 2020, I would miss mysteries aplenty. Now this next one really doesn't pertain to me, I hope. But it does to some I knew, and some I know, and some I don't. Oh, that I were a politician, or else a person with a mission. Heavens, how happy I could be if only I were sure of me. How would I strut could I believe that out of all the sons of Eve, God had granted this former youth a binding option on his truth. One side of the moon you've never seen. The one side of the moon you've never seen alone. On the other side, she has never shown. What dreamless sleep, what sound digestion, work the same with every question? Sometimes with secret pride I send to think how tolerant am I. And wonder which is really mine, tolerance or rubber spine. This is for Linda as I close. My wife's in love, everyone knows. Talented, beautiful, and clever. May we together always be forever. Though you know it anyhow, listen to me, darling, now. Proving that I need not prove how I know I love you, love. Near and far, I'm happy where you are. Likewise, I've never learned how to be where you aren't. Far and wide, I can walk with you beside. Furthermore, I tell you what, I sit and sulk where you are not. Visitors remark my frown when you're upstairs and I am down. Yes, I'm afraid I pout when I'm indoors and when you are out. But how contentedly I view any room containing you. In fact, I care not where you be, just as long as it's with me. Oh, your absence as I glimpse flood and trolls and imps. If you're plain a minute late, slothful, I go to the gate agent wrathful. With friends you meet to drive, I never know if you're alive. When you linger late in shops, I long to call the cops. Yet how worth the waiting for is see you coming in through the door. Somehow I can be complacent, never but with you adjacent. Near and far, I'm happy where you are. Likewise, I've never learned how to be it when you aren't. And grudge me not my fond endeavor to hold you in my sight forever. Let none, not even you, disparage such a valid reason for a marriage.
Thank you, Senator. We have one surprise guest that's here this evening. Her name is Colleen Fresney. She's a poet. Do you want to go ahead and come up? Please welcome Colleen.
So this poem I wrote. Old love. Not the old like worn soles of a favorite shoe, nor that of the day-old bread that crumples with change, nor pens blue, aged and dried after inspiration waned, nor fish hooks now lying dormant on the rusty bottom of the tackle box, nor that of shingles whose corners are bent and missing of weathered years, nor like a barn's roof sunken sour as breath is sucked out in fear of death, nor the centurion love written of in newsletters and newspapers beat its success. Oh no. Old love, like the sun is old and warm, that love. Love like each star is cast and brilliant still. Old as the moon, still rising and retreating. Love battled, though rarely kissed.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Colleen. Julie Overlander joined the KAVN News team in November 2002 and has been recognized for her reporting skills 3 times by the South Dakota Associated Press. Julie became the weekday anchor at KAVN in February of 2005. She also attends our story times with her kiddo, and we enjoy seeing her often. Please welcome Julie Overlander.
Thank you. Well, when Janet wrote and she said you can choose a favorite poem, you can choose a favorite writer, you can choose anything, serious, a children's favorite, whatever. And so when she said children's favorite, I knew which one I wanted to do. I have a sister who's 4 years older than I am, and I remember when she was probably about in middle school, she brought home a book called Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. I love his poetry because it's so descriptive. You can see what he wants you to see, and sometimes, unfortunately, you can smell it too, and you'll know what I mean. So the first one I chose is Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout by Shel Silverstein. Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout would not take the garbage out. She'd wash the dishes and scrub the pans, cook the yams and spice the hams, and though her parents would scream and shout, she simply would not take the garbage out. And so it piled up to the ceiling, coffee grounds, potato peelings, brown bananas and rotten peas, chunks of sour cottage cheese. It filled the can, it covered the floor, it cracked the windows and blocked the door. with bacon rinds and chicken bones, drippy ends of ice cream cones, prune pits, peach pits, orange peels, gloppy glumps of cold oatmeal, pizza crusts and withered greens, soggy beans and tangerines, crusts of black-burned buttered toast, grisly bits of beefy roast. The garbage rolled on down the halls, it raised the roof, it broke the walls. I mean greasy napkins, cookie crumbs, blobs of gooey bubble gum, cellophane from old bologna, rubbery, blubbery macaroni, peanut butter caked and dry, curdled milk and crusts of pie, rotting melons, dried up mustard, eggshells mixed with lemon custard, cold French fries and rancid meat, yellow lumps of cream of wheat. At last the garbage reached so high that finally it touched the sky, and none of her friends would come to play, and all of her neighbors moved away. And finally, Sarah Cynthia Stout said, "Okay, I'll take the garbage out." But then, of course, it was too late. The garbage reached across the state, from New York to the Golden Gate, and there in the garbage she did hate. Poor Sarah met an awful fate that I cannot right now relate, because the hour is much too late. But children, remember Cynthia Stout, and always take the garbage out. I picked that one truthfully because taking the garbage out is my absolute least favorite house chore to ever do. I would rather clean the bathroom and do any number of things before I take the garbage out, but I don't wait that long. Next up, I think is just fitting, because Janet mentioned my 12 and a half years now in television news. So this one, also by Shel Silverstein, is Jimmy Jett and his TV set. I'll tell you the story of Jimmy Jett, and you know what I tell you is true. He loved to watch his TV set almost as much as you. He watched all day, he watched all night, till he grew pale and lean, from the early show to the late, late show, and all the shows between. He watched till his eyes were frozen wide, and his bottom grew into his chair, and his chin turned into a tuning dial, and antenna grew from his hair. And his brains turned into TV tubes, and his face to a TV screen, and two knobs saying Vert and Hariz grew where his ears had been. And he grew a plug that looked like a tail, so we plugged in little Jim, and now instead of him watching TV, we all sit around and watch him. Thank you.
Ashley Parr hails from East Texas. He would probably tell you that it is all my fault that he is now a transplant to the Black Hills. I think he enjoys the hills more than he lets on, possibly with the exception being the winter weather. It's hard for a Texan to adapt. Ashley is, however, a good sport for allowing me to name him as a poetry reader this evening. Ashley is an attorney and business owner of Parla PC. He is also the wonderful father of our wonder child, Ashton Parr, who is tall, exceptional, and practically perfect in every way. Ashley will read If by Rudyard Kipling. Please help welcome Ashley Parr.
I do what Senator Adelstein did. I don't know what I need to. I do like the Black Hills. I do miss Texas. I was honored to be asked to speak amongst all these other famous people that other people know. I'm going to be the unknown on the list tonight. So without further ado, I had my one poem that I was required to do. And I'll just be honest, I don't read a lot of poetry. I don't know that I've read poetry probably since college. But when Janet asked me to do this, or rather forced me to do this, I started reading poetry again. And of course, Amy, just as anyone else these days, you on the internet. So I finally found a poem that I like. It's by Rudyard Kipling. He's an English poet. I can't quite remember the years. I think it's the late 19th century. But in any event, the poem seems to have been written for a father to a son with advice and philosophies of life. So that's why I liked it. I hope you guys like it as well. If by Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster, and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss and lose, and start again at your beginning and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can feel the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and, which is more, you'll be a man inside.
We are going to go ahead and have Randy come up now and sing. So it'll probably take just a few minutes for them to get set up.
When I get up there, I want to get down. I could have read it a lot faster.
All right, we have Randy McAllister this evening for an interview 2 years ago. Randy is another
I know all sorts of
transplant. We'll just let everyone know about. Grammy nominee Randy McAllister is one of the premier singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist to emerge from Texas. Heartbreak, humor, high hair, and tall Texas tales all play a part in his songwriting. And now, Randy McAllister.
It's presumptuous to think of myself as a poet, just a caveman that jams a bunch of words into some melodies, and lucky enough to make a career out of it. I was trying to decide. I didn't spend a lot of time trying to decide because it didn't require that much thinking. I was just trying to decide which direction to go with the song, like go for humor or go for something a little bit more serious. And this was a little bit more serious, which is not usually the direction I go.
my life, time and time again, sabotaging me. I've been looking back on what I've let go, the things that I let slip away now, darling, and didn't take a chance on. And I'm wondering now, oh, if it's too late, yeah, for me to change, or will I stay the same, always running away? I work real hard to get what I want. Oh, and I start to stumble again when I get just so close. Oh, and I want the most, I push the furthest away. Fear of failure or success, the results are the same. Push the furthest away. Fear of failure or success, the results are the same. I've been looking back on what I've let go, things that I let slip away now, darling, and didn't take chance on. And I'm wondering now, oh, if it's too late, well, for me to change, or will I stay the same, always running away?
Chapman is president and founder of the Chapman Group. Apparently, he sets a very high bar as master of ceremonies. Because as I was planning this event, I was thinking, Janet, why are you doing this to yourself? I've never been an MC before, clearly. So I thought I'd share this with a few people. Old people I told that to, that I was wondering how this was going to go. They said, oh, you should see Malcolm Chapman MC an event. He is the best MC. So then I thought, this is great, isn't it? Now, the best MC is attending the community poetry event. But honestly, I couldn't be happier. Malcolm is full of energy. I'm pretty sure he makes every room a better place. Please welcome Malcolm Chapman.
Let's give it up for the best MC. And I can't go to read poetry without Dr. Seuss, so he has to stay close. I don't think I'm going to read any Dr. Seuss today, but I just need it close to me. Before I get started, let me just say thank you to our library and for finding a way to connect nationally with National Poetry Month, and it's just pretty cool. I've been tweeting out different things today and watching what other people around the country are doing this month, and it's pretty cool that we're doing something here, and I'm just proud and pleased to be a part of it. I'd like to just read a couple of things about poetry before I read the poems that I'm here to read. One is by Mark Nepo. Mark Nepo says, "For me, poetry is the unexpected utterance of the soul. It is where the soul touches the everyday. It is less about words and more about awakening the sense of aliveness we carry within us from birth. To walk quietly to the miracle in everything speaks is poetry, whether we write it down or not. I confess I started to write great poems, only to be warned by life, to be wanting to discover true poems. And now in the second half of my life, I feel humble and excited to want to be the poem." Mark Nepo. David White says, "Poetry is the art of hearing yourself say things that you didn't know you knew. And as human beings, we're constantly trying to find solid ground, where to stand up. But that solid ground, we always want a relationship with the intangible. If poetry is anything, it's that relationship, that conversation between what is solid, grounded, and real in our life, and what we long for in the untouchable, the numinous, the eternal." And then one of my favorites who says this about poetry, Garrison Keillor writes, "The meaning of poetry is to give courage. A poem is not a puzzle the dutiful readers are obliged to solve. It is meant to poke you, to get up, to buck up, pay attention, rise and shine, look alive, get a grip, get the picture, pull up your socks, wake up, and die right." Garrison Keillor. One of the poems that I'm going to read tonight is from Langston Hughes, and Langston Hughes was born around the beginning of the 20th century and then migrated to Harlem and was part of that great Harlem Renaissance from about 1918 to the mid-1930s that had W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey and Carl Van Vechen and Charlotte Mason and a number of other black artists at that time. And in 5th grade, we would pay honor to the 6th graders in our school, and the 5th graders would always do some little show. And my class had to do a poem, and we did Mother to Son by Langston Hughes, and I had one line in the poem, and I missed it. My only line was the word bear, and I missed it. So I'm going to read Langston Hughes tonight, Mother to Son. And Langston Hughes was born, his grandmother, both of his grandmothers were slaves, and both of his grandfathers were slave owners. So, I could imagine him listening to his grandmothers as a kid and maybe having this experience. But Mother to Son. "Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor. Bare. But all the time, I's been a climbing and reaching new landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps, 'cause you finds it kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I's still going, honey. I's still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair." Langston Hughes. I thought I would do something that was early on in my life, Langston Hughes, and then I thought, I'm 53 years old, and I guess I'm in the middle part of my life, as my younger brother tells me, it's past halftime for us. So this is a poem by a guy by the name of David Wagner, and David lives on Whidbey Island, of Washington State, and he talks about what's real for kids there if they go out and play in these forests that have these tall trees in it. It's life-threatening for these kids. But David is really talking about what happens in the middle part of your life, or what can happen. He says, if you're lost, stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger. You must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers. I made this place around you. If you leave, you may come back again, saying, here. No two trees are the same to wren. No two branches are the same to raven. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still, for the forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. And I think that happens in the middle passage of some lives sometime. And my favorite American poet is a woman by the name of Mary Oliver, and I don't go anywhere without taking some Mary Oliver with me. And my favorite Mary Oliver poem is The Journey, but I'm not going to read that one tonight because I'm going to talk about, if I can talk about something when I was a kid, and then maybe in the middle passages, then maybe I'll talk about something at the very end. And this poem is called When Death Comes by Mary Oliver. Mary writes, when death comes, like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and it takes the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut, when death comes, like the measles pox, when death comes, like the iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through that door full of curiosity and wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore I look upon everything as a brotherhood and sisterhood. I look upon time as no more than an idea, and I consider eternity another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular, and as each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending like all music does towards silence. And each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say, all my life, I was a bride to and married to amazement. I was a bridegroom, taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made something particular and real in my life. I don't want to find myself sighing or frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world when death comes.
Elizabeth Cook Lynn is a teacher, essayist, fiction writer, and poet whose book of poems is titled I Remember the Fallen Trees. In 2009, she received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Native Writers Circle of the Americas. She is president of the First Nations Sculpture Garden Project, a very important project for our community that will be in Halley Park. Elizabeth is reading original works this evening entitled There is Always Time, There's Always Rain This Time of Year, An Interruption of a Fishing Trip. Please welcome Elizabeth Cookman.
Hello, I'm glad to be here. Can you hear me? There's nothing more annoying than sitting in the audience and not being able to hear. So I hope you can hear me. I go to a lot of poetry readings. I tried to look for a poem that was funny, and I couldn't find any. I guess that's because I grew up in the era when we were all reading The Wasteland, by T.S. Eliot. Dismal stuff. I do remember going to a poetry reading when Dylan Thomas was the poet. He was very, very drunk. died a year later, and then his poems came out after a year. His collection came out, which I guess says to you that if you're a poet, wait until you die. But I have looked for a poem that was fun. And I go to a lot of poetry readings. I went to a poetry reading of cowboy poets recently at Nebraska. And there are 30 cowboy poets there reading and talking about how wonderful poetry was and talking about how everybody loved poetry. And this one guy ended up by saying, yeah, and then they don't buy a goddamn book. So some of us do write books of poems, and this is mine, one of them. And I remember the fallen trees. I always write about things that I want to remember, I guess. So I've got 2 poems, and they're about men. I think that, you know, men are more interesting to our lives as women than women are. I hate to say that because it's not popular, but I think it's true. I think it's true. I've been married twice, you know, I've got a brother, or 2 or 3, and this was a poem about going fishing with my dad. And my dad was Ashanti, and he lived on the reservation all his life. He is an old rodeo rider, and he ended up being a rancher. Made more money by accident than most people do by, you know, really. So this is called Interruption of a Fishing Trip. I was a college professor, doing research, of course, every time I went home. And he was just out there fishing. So this is called Interruption of a Fishing Trip. Downtown brick facades of houses of Midwest historical societies at places like St. Paul and Missions, they aren't plagued by flies, mosquitoes, red-striped garter snakes, slipping through the warm light to the delight of the fisherman who holds my arm. He parks his fishing pole in an abundant cove and mounts shale steps to face doors, vault-like, glowing with radium, that guard the smug shelves beckoning us to Shakespeare and the Bible and the many penny diaries and Custer's luck and the Verendic flag. Rooms are sprayed against tobacco smoke and mold. No sound all around me silences this monstrous caricature of life. He eyes the pamphlets and the frescoes of the New World hanging from ceilings as they pronounce their measure of promise, repolished by hands of ghosts. He sits alone, waits for me to gather my research materials, stares at the old women at the desk who are measuring each other's devotion to Dewey's order. But he doesn't turn a single page. Where does it get us, trying to share our confounding yet congenial ways? When we left off fishing to read at the library, I imagined he'd find a useful message we both find comforting. Later, he confesses that what he has found as he takes up his own daily catch is that the emptiness of my search will only cause sublime pessimism about the future of Indians. By throwing our bait in wistful and unsophisticated arcs into the unwelcome surface of yellow dust and rare pollens, we hook a restless audience made up of our own gathered ways, discerning the light rarely dimmed by our own silver portraits. This one is for a brother who was in the Navy and didn't come home. And so poetry is a way to remember. Poetry is also a way to avoid, what is it, as somebody said, a suicide or homicide. But poetry is really a way to have hope. There's always rain this time of year. And rain, you know, among the tribes is always a sign of hope. So this comes in several, I think, 5 parts, small parts. And you have to imagine me walking along the Crow Creek with this brother and seeing what it is we see. We are accompanied, of course, by all of the small creatures that are along the Crow Creek. I grew up along a place called Kudwijut, and it's a tributary to the Missouri River. There's always rain this time of the year. Number 1, it was the day of the coyote, slinking out in the morning dampness of the prairie hayfields. Swarms of mosquitoes taking charge in the backbone of the universe, where shadow was hidden from the thread of sunlight. He went on, beginning in the ground, where pain is so deep it has no explanations. One blade of grass will sprout from where he runs. Spring will return. Number 2. It was the night of the porcupine, lucky but uneasy, hiding in trees. He hears women singing from the river, talking to someone who does not answer. He is at home in the earth. His smell is of the fires from 1,000 homes. His quill grows like a lance to brush away the aromatic tobacco, spewing ashes left by travelers. Number 3. The badger's white teeth flash in their own language the art of power. He's deep in the muddy waters, rushing and rolling in the rain, washing the bloodthirsty flies from his stiff arms, his hair, helping him catch his breath as he crawls off into the long grass. Number 4. It was that day of the coyote when I walked with them all, thinking of letters I would write to you. The words I write and put into poems for you show me how to grow up and how to get old, like the bull snake lying near my ankles, naked, numb, gloomy in the cold rain. His wrinkled old eyes covered like furious stones, living among the wild beasts who are born to die upon the land. I fell with you into the hole the roots made, and the sky, a long time ago, and slowly meandered from the hills to gather up the late coming things that make sense of where we are. Watching a red-tailed hawk hunting overhead, the pronghorn deer dropping its limp newborn calf, wobbling and trying to nurse. I'm relieved to be here alone now, to write the imagined past the same as the imagined future. Number 5. It is that time of the porcupine and the river's promise and the coyote to show me what I need to know. What happens in the night, in the rain, moistens the words so long dry, phrase by phrase. I write on cold November afternoons, allowing pentimenta that has become visible pityingly, memory of you, I greet with the wet drops on my face. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim McShane has been our fearless library director here at the library since December 2013. Previously, he was library director for 9 years at Kent Memorial Library in Suffield, Connecticut. Jim is full of programming ideas. Jim is full of programming ideas. It's all good though. He will be reading 3 selections by Ogden Nash and The Waking by Theodore Retke. Please give a welcome to Jim McShane.
Thank you, Janet. She knows how much I love the limelight, and I think this is revenge for all of those programming ideas that I've been giving her since she started this job. I do want to thank you all for being here. Even if I do hate the limelight, I love poetry, and I think it needs to be celebrated. And I'm really glad to have been here tonight because, honestly, actually, I don't think I've ever heard a better rendition of If. And the accent was just perfect. So thank you. Thanks, God. Poetry, I don't read a lot of poetry, but when I do, I read a lot of it. And I like to read it out loud, and I often get rather quizzical looks from my dog. And that's appropriate, I suppose, because I like to read it loudly and into the wind. And I think that's the way the poetry should be actually read. It shows the power of words, and it really, poetry helps you see. And that is its main purpose for me. So today, I have a couple of poems. I'm going to switch the order and do Rothko first, just because it's a little serious. And it's nice to know that the Senator and I have the same taste in poetry, so I'm looking forward to reading the Ogden Nash poem. The Waking. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I feel my fate in what I cannot fear. I learn by going where I have to go. And think by feeling, what is there to know? I hear my being dance from ear to ear. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Of those so close beside me, which are you? God bless the ground. I shall walk softly there and learn by going where I have to go. Light takes the tree, but who can tell us how? The lowly worm climbs up a winding stair. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Great nature has another thing to do, to you and me, so take the lively air and, lovely, learn by going where to go. The shaking keeps me steady. I should know. What falls away is always and is near. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I learn by going where I have to go. Now the Ogden Nash. The pig. The pig, if I'm not mistaken, supplies us sausage, ham, and bacon. Let others say his heart is big. I call it stupid. The next one is Song of the Open Road. I think that I shall never see a billboard as lovely as a tree. Perhaps unless the billboards fall, I'll never see a tree at all. It's genius, wasn't it? And finally, to my Valentine, and I would like to dedicate this to the person I hope to spend the rest of my life with. More than a catbird hates a cat, or a criminal hates a clue,
or the Axis hates the United States. That's how much I love you. I love you more than a duck can swim, and more than a grapefruit squirts. I love you more than gin rummy is a bore, and more than a toothache hurts. As a shipwrecked sailor hates the sea, or a juggler hates a show. As a hostess detests unexpected guests, that's how much you I love. I love you more than a wasp can sting, and more than a subway jerks. I love you as much as a beggar needs a crutch, and more than a hangnail perks. I sway you by the stars above and below, if such they be. As the high court loathes injurious oaths, that's how you are loved by me.
Thank you, Jim. Pat Myers has been providing legal representation in Rapid City for over 25 years. 25 years ago, there were not as many women attorneys as there are here now. I think it's safe to say she has certainly paved the way for more female lawyers. Pat will be reading I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth. Please welcome Pat Myers.
Well, now that she's told you how old I am. It's interesting for me to listen to all of you tonight and hear what poetry means to you. It seems to evoke feelings and thoughts and remembering people that we loved or cherished or lost, and funny things and sad things and all those things. Well, this poem, for me, sums up a season, and the season is spring. I wandered lonely as a cloud, which floats on high o'er vale and hill, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake. Beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margins of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the waves, the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not be but gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth to show that they had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inner eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with gladness fills, and dances with the daffodils.
Thank you, Pat. Wilbur, you are next, but you are not least. Wilbur Holtz has been pastor at Trinity Lutheran Church since 2005. He received his theology degree in 1989, revealing age again, I'm sorry, from Lutheran Northwestern Theological Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Please welcome Wilbur Holtz.
That's okay. It's the double nickel this year, so no worries. Poetry. Malcolm, you forgot that great line from Dead Poets Society. Poetry is to woo women. When thinking about poetry, gosh, Robert Service, Waddy Mitchell, some of those great humorists, Les Barker. If you don't know some of these names, they are very funny. But I chose a couple of, well, one classic and one parody of a classic. Ernest Lawrence Thayer, newspaperman. Career began college when he was an editor for the Harvard Lampoon. Hired by William Randolph Hearst to be a humor colorist for the San Francisco Examiner. June 3rd, 1888, he submitted his last piece, a ballad that became immensely popular, but it was his only foray into poetry, truly making him a one-hit wonder. Casey at the Bat by Ernest Lawrence Thayer. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville Nine that day. The score stood 4-2 with but one inning more to play. And when Cooney died at first, and Barrows did the same, A pall-like silence fell upon the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to go in deep despair. The rest clung to the hope that springs eternal in the human breast. They thought if only Casey could but get a whack at that. We'd put up even money now with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, as did also Jimmy Blake. Former was a Lulu, latter was a cake. So upon that stricken multitude grim melancholy sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey getting to the bat. But Flynn let drive a single, to the wonderment of all, and Blake, the much despised, had tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had lifted, and the men saw what occurred, there was Jimmy safe at second, and Flynn a hug in third. Then from 5,000 throats there rose a lusty yell. It rumbled through the valley, it rattled in the dell, it pounded on the mountain and recoiled upon the flat, for Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place, pride in Casey's bearing, a smile in Casey's face. And when responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his hat. No stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded him when he wiped them on his shirt. And then the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip. Defiance flashed in Casey's eyes. A sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered spheroid came hurtling through the air, and Casey stood a-watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman, the ball unheeded sped. "That ain't my style," said Casey. "Strike one," the umpire said. From the benches black with people there went up a muffled roar, like the beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore. "Kill them! Kill the umpire!" shouted someone in the stand. And it's likely they'd have killed him had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visit shone. He stilled the rising tumult, he bade the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more this dun sphere flew. But Casey still ignored it, and the umpire said, "Strike two!" "Fraud!" cried the bat in thousands, and the echo answered, "Fraud!" But one scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain. They knew that Casey would not let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lips. His teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate, and now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go, and now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land, the sun is shining bright. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light. And somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. And nothing serves so well as an object for parody as a well-known, well-loved piece of literature. Garrison Keillor, known for being host of Writer's Almanac, contributor to the New York Magazine, also the chronicler of life in Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, host of Prairie Home Companion, for over 40 years. Over the years that I have learned that much in life is all a matter of perspective. Here is Mr. Keillor's perspective on Ernest Thayer's poem, Casey at the Bat, Road Game. It was looking rather hopeful for our Dustburg team that day. We were leading Mudville 4-2 with an inning left to play. We got Cooney on a grounder and Muldoon on the same. 2 down, none out, none on. 2 down, none on, top of the 9th. We thought we'd won the game. Mudville was despairing, and we grinned and cheered and clapped. It looked like all these years our losing streak had snapped. We only wished that Casey, that big fat ugly lout, could be the patsy who would make the final shameful out. Oh, how we hated Casey. He was a blot upon the game. Every dog in Dustburg barked at the mention of his name. A bully, a braggart, a cretin, and a swine. If Casey came to bat, we'd stick it where the moon don't shine. 2 out, and up came Flynn to bat with Jimmy Blake on deck. Former, a loser. The latter, a wreck. Though the game was in the bag, the Dustburg fans were hurt to think that Casey would not come and get his just dessert. But Flynn, he got a single, a most unlikely sight, and Blake swung like a lady, but he parked it deep and right. And when the dust had lifted and fickle fate had beckoned, there was Flynn on third base and Jimmy safe at second. Then from every Dustburg throat there rose a lusty cry, "Bring up that slimy greaseball and let him stand and die! Throw the mighty slider and let him hear it whiz, and let him hit a pop-up like the pansy that he is." There was pride in Casey's visage as he strode onto the grass. There was scorn in his demeanor as he calmly scratched his ass. 10,000 people booed him when he stepped into the box. He made the sound of farting when he bent to fix his socks. And the fabled slider came spinning toward the mitt. Casey watched it sliding and did not go for it. And the umpire jerked his arm like he was hauling down the sun, and his cry rang from the box seats to the bleachers, "Steer right, 1!" 10,000 Dustburg partisans raised such a mighty cheer. The pigeons in the rafters cracked and ruined all the beer. "You filthy, ignorant, rotten bastard, slimy son of a..." We screamed at mighty Casey, and then came the second pitch. It was our hero's fastball that came across the plate. And according to the radar, it was going 98. According to the umpire, it came in straight and true. And the cry rang from the toilets to the bullpen, "Steer right, 2!" 10,000 Dustburg fans arose in joyful loud derision to question Casey's salary, his manhood, and his vision. Then while the Dustburg pitcher put the rosin on the ball, 10,000 people hooted to think of Casey's fall. Oh, the fury in his visage as he spat tobacco juice, and heard the little children screaming violent abuse. He knocked the dirt off his spikes, reached down and eased his pants. "What's the matter, did you lose him?" cried a lady in the stands. And then the Dustburg pitcher stood majestic on the hill, and leaned in toward the plate, and then the crowd was still. And went into his windup, and he kicked and he let it go, and the air was shattered by the force of Casey's blow. He swung so hard his hair fell off and he toppled in disgrace. And the Dustburg catcher held the ball and the crowd tore up the place. With Casey prostrate in the dirt and the screams and the jeers, we threw wieners down on him and other souvenirs. We pounded on the dugout roof and they helped him to the bench. Then we ran out to the parking lot and got a monkey wrench. And found the mud-filled bus and took the lug nuts off the tires. And attached some firecrackers to the alternator wires. We rubbed the doors and windows with a special kind of cheese that smells like something died from an intestinal disease. Old Casey took his sweet time, but we were glad to wait. And we showered him with garbage as the team came out the gate. So happy were the Dustburg fans that grand and glorious day, took a dozen cops to haul poor Casey away. But we grabbed hold of the bumpers and we rocked him to and fro, and he cursed us from inside the bus, and gosh, we loved it so. Oh, sometimes in America the sun is shining bright. Life is joyful sometimes, and all the world seems right. But there is no joy in Dustburg, no joy so pure and sweet, as when the mighty Casey fell, demolished at our feet.